modern science has had its head up its ass for much of the last 70 years trying to avoid discussing the issue. And now the evidence is so overwhelming, frankly, that even the mainstream media has still got the blinkers on. They're still reluctant to engage in most cases. And the interesting thing is that slowly but surely science is being dragged to the reality that there is indeed a phenomenon that's real that cannot be explained yet.
Yet. And I find it interesting as well that the scientific method, the engine which drives science, it was never meant to prove anything. It has one goal, and that's to disprove anything that isn't what it set out to find, which is the ultimate reality.
Yeah, but again, I'll tell you, I think the scientific method, whilst I applaud it, I think it's a great thing to have a discipline with how we objectively prove things. The scientific method, frankly, is a big steaming pile of bull dung. It's rubbish. Ultimately, the pompous assertions that are made by many in science that there is this method that everyone agrees on as a way of establishing reality, as a way of essentially proving a phenomenon. If you apply the scientific method to UAPs, the existence of UAPs would have been accepted long before the Pentagon finally was pushed into a corner and forced to admit it in July last year. I just have a bee in my bonnet about the scientific method. I think that as a journalist, I've learned the way that science allows itself to be politicized. And I think there are a lot of the gatekeepers in modern science who, frankly, have their heads up their asses on UAPs. They are reluctant to acknowledge the reality that is there right under their noses. It's why I called my book In Plain Sight.
I agree with you, Ross. In fact, I think that it's become more of the political method than the scientific method, to be honest with you.
I mean, I really do. And I think science is often used to shut down public debate in Australia. I mean, I had a Roads to Carthage moment myself as a journalist when I looked at the science of global warming. And I rang the Australian members of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And one of them, John Zillman, admitted to me that he was a global warming skeptic, that he didn't agree with the science. Hang on a moment, you're one of these 1001 or whatever it is concerned scientists who are regularly being parroted by the different green groups as a person who unequivocally supports the theory that the world is headed for catastrophe with global warming. And he said, well, nobody asked me.
Oh my God.
And it's interesting because I've done that research and I've spoken to people all around the world who are members of the IPCC who privately and publicly admit that they are skeptical about the claims that are made by mathematical algorithms that are used to predict weather, which frankly just can't, because our mathematical models in our computers are nowhere near being able to predict something as complicated as a weather system. And whilst I unequivocally support the idea that we should be running a Manhattan-style project to develop nuclear fusion or alternative energy systems, the biggest priority on the planet right now should be finding a way of providing energy cheaply to everyone on the planet. I rather suspect that, yes, it is true that there is a kind of a coterie of fossil fuel producers that are essentially protecting their nest by discouraging further research and investment in alternative energy systems. But the bullshit that's spun about renewables and the idea that renewables are going to be a solution, there is no fucking way that wind power is going to solve the world's problems with energy. It's weird.
Right.
And I find the truculent resistance of some who use science to essentially catastrophize the planet and suggest that the roof is falling in because we're killing our planet because we use fossil fuels. I mean, frankly, I agree with that. I think we should get off fossil fuels. Absolutely. Right. But you can't just dismantle an industrial society that's been created in the last 150 years and expect that you can walk away from that without having an alternative energy system. And, it's the dishonesty in science that I find unscientific.
Yeah, there's definitely bias in the one place where there shouldn't be bias, and that's in the scientific community. Do you remember what his specific hang-up was over the data?
You're talking about the guy that I spoke to, Zillman?
Yeah.
Basically, he had an issue with the fact that the mathematical algorithms that were being used on supercomputers to predict weather system outcomes weren't accurate. And, he was the head of the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia at the time, Dr. John
Right.
Zillman. And so he was basically telling me, yeah, I'm a member of the IPCC, but I can tell you the mathematical modeling that I'm seeing is not matching what we're seeing. It's over predicting. It's over catastrophizing what's happening to the environment. And he said there are clearly variables that we're not factoring into the mathematical models that are lessening the effect of the warming. He argued that, yes, we do. Of course, we have to look for alternatives to fossil fuels. And, he was endorsing very much the idea that, society should be moving away from things that pollute our environment. Of course we should. That's a given.
That's why this phenomenon is so fascinating, because if we could somehow employ the technology that we're clearly seeing happening around us, being able to control gravity isn't just like the perfect weapon, it's the perfect thing.
Right now, the only thing that makes gravity, as far as we know, is mass. You just need a bunch of stuff, and it's a property of mass. We observe gravity, we see what it does, but we really don't know what it is. We can throw some equations together and say, well, it works like this, but we really don't know what's behind it. But if you can make a machine that on demand makes gravity, all the stuff we write fiction about stops becoming science fiction that afternoon. Force fields become a reality. You can shift time. You can make impenetrable fields. You can have propulsion that is mind-boggling. Everything becomes possible. It's the most important thing, and here is an operating machine sitting in front of us that makes gravity. And do we really want to be able to make one of those things?
It would be the ultimate weapon.
Not just the ultimate weapon, but it would really be the ultimate thing. It would catapult mankind forward. And what really sucks is the military is in control of this.
I agree with you. Look, fundamentally, this is the most important thing. The Pentagon's admission that this phenomenon is real, after years of equivocation and telling us that it's swamp gas or weather balloons, and telling us that 90% of these cases can be plausibly explained with a prosaic explanation. The fact that they've now done a double backflip with pipe and acknowledged that what we're looking at is something that we cannot explain, that it's a technology. Documents released yesterday in an FOI, a Freedom of Information application, I think the US edition of the London Sun published it just in the last 2 days. They show that internally, the Pentagon is referring to these craft as vehicles.
Good
something
Lord.
intelligently operating vehicles using technologies. And this is the kicker. They are technologies that are clearly deriving energy in a way that we do not yet comprehend.
God
Because
damn.
the energy that would be required to do things like what we know, what the Tic Tac has been observed doing. There's one example, I think the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs, SCUAP, they did a bit of research just looking at the one example of the Tic Tac that was seen hovering at 80,000 feet, and in the blink of an eye, in 0.78 of a second or less, Kevin Day recorded it on the phased array radar system on the USS Princeton going to the surface of the ocean. Now, the SCUAP scientists analyzed the energy that would be required to do that. And they said that it would exceed the consumption of the entire United States from every single nuclear power plant in the United States for 1 year. Just that one maneuver. The implications. And so this is the thing that is fascinating to me, is that right under our noses, there is a technology being deployed that is using energy in a way that we do not yet understand. And this is where I think the mainstream media is largely dropping the ball and failing to understand the implications of what
Right.
the US Pentagon, the most powerful military on the planet, has admitted.